Hello and welcome everyone to the Environment Primer series of Drishti IAS. My name is Pragya, and as I have been discussing in the Environment Primer series and as has been discussed in the news also, that the biggest climate conference happened this year was the COP28. So COP28 has ended, and the major discussion in this climate change conference was the unabated use of fossil fuels. The countries are trying to follow a solution-centric approach rather than following a problem-centric approach, as I have been explaining to you before also in our Environment Primer series. So the countries have, trying to find out the techniques that can actually reduce carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and hence in turn keep with our target of achieving net zero emissions. Okay, so we are going to discuss today carbon dioxide removal versus carbon capture and storage. These two techniques were very widely discussed and deliberated at the COP28 this year. In this discussion, we are going to study about what is this carbon capture and storage technique. We are also going to see what is carbon dioxide removal. We are also going to analyze the scale and efficacy of CCS and CDR. Then we are also going to analyze the limitations of using these techniques, and in the end we are going to see a practice question for your prelims examination and a practice question for your mains examination. So if I talk about the background of our today's topic, so the countries are actually worried about the use of fossil fuels. They are constantly talking about phasing down of fossil fuels, phasing down of fossil fuels, okay. They are also talking about decreasing their dependence on the fossil fuels, and that is why they are trying to find out new techniques to abate the use of fossil fuels, to decrease their dependency on the fossil fuels. They are also trying to figure it out that how can we reduce the carbon dioxide from atmosphere. So they are discussing these new techniques, and one of them is carbon capture and storage, and the other of them is carbon dioxide removal. So let us discuss what is this carbon capture and storage technique talked about at the COP28 this year. So if I try to explain this term carbon capture and storage, or the CCS, in very layman terms or in very simple terms to you, it means that you are targeting the carbon dioxide at the very source point of it. So what you are doing? You are targeting the source of emitters, like source of emissions of carbon dioxide, and you are completely removing, sidelining carbon dioxide from that source itself, and then you are channelizing that carbon dioxide into inside the earth. So this is what is actually capturing carbon from its original source and then channelizing it to some other or burying it deep down within the earth so that it cannot leak into the atmosphere. This in very simple terms is carbon capture and storage. Okay, so carbon capture and storage is the separation of carbon dioxide, as I have explained to you, and from industrial exhaust coupled with the permanent geological storage of that carbon, and it is applied on cement, steel, power plants, chemical production facilities, etc. So all of these are sources of carbon dioxide emissions, and what we are doing, we are directly targeting these sources so as to separate this carbon dioxide from other gases and bury it deep down within the earth. Okay, now let us understand this better by a pictorial representation of it. So what are we doing? This is supposedly a natural gas that is burned at the power station. Okay, so this natural gas definitely emits carbon dioxide. You are separating this carbon dioxide from other gases, and you are burying this carbon dioxide under the oceans or under the earth so that it cannot escape into the atmosphere. So this in short was the carbon capture and storage technique. Now let us discuss what is carbon dioxide removal and how it is different from the CCS. So if I talk about carbon capture and storage, you are targeting the carbon dioxide that has not emitted into the atmosphere yet. But in carbon dioxide removal, you are targeting that carbon dioxide that has already been emitted in the atmosphere. So carbon dioxide removal refers to anthropogenic activities, removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere that is actually been emitted into the atmosphere. Okay, and durably storing it in geological, terrestrial or ocean reservoirs or in products. So in carbon dioxide removal, you try to remove the carbon dioxide that is originally present in the atmosphere, that has actually emitted into the atmosphere. This can be done by pinpointed technologies. by pinpointed and intentional human actions. Okay, for example, afforestation, for example, reforestation, for example, maintaining the carbon sinks, maintaining the forest covers. So, what are we trying to do? We are actually trying to reduce the carbon dioxide from the air. Okay, and these removals can firstly accelerate the reduction of net emissions. Immediately, the immediate result is acceleration of reduction of net emissions. What are the countries trying to do? They are trying to reduce their net emissions. They are trying to bring down their net emissions. And definitely, this carbon dioxide removal is effective in that regard. If I talk about near term, it can counterbalance hard to abate emissions. See, there are various industries such as cement, steel, etc. And the emissions from these industries are hard to abate, although they are dependent on the fossil fuels, but they are so useful to our day-to-day lives that it is technically not possible to completely reduce their emissions. And that is why this carbon dioxide removal can counterbalance the hard to abate emissions from the day-to-day basis and day-to-day industries that are important for our completing our day-to-day needs. Okay, then in the long run it can definitely deliver net negative emissions. So I'm not saying this is being said by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So IPCC argues that yes, carbon dioxide removal is very important if the countries want to achieve their net negative emissions, net zero emissions by 2050. Okay, so this was the technique of carbon dioxide removal. You understood the difference, right? In CCS, we are targeting the original source, and in carbon dioxide removal, we are targeting that carbon dioxide that has already been emitted into the atmosphere. Okay. So, when the origin of the carbon dioxide is exclusively fossil or geological carbon, example fossil fuels, limestone, etc., that means the carbon that is natural in nature, then CCS is emission reduction and not carbon removal is the solution. So, in these cases, in cases of geological carbon, okay, you need to have CCS, that is carbon capture and storage, and that cannot be undone by just carbon dioxide removal. So, there is this another point of difference between CCS and CDR. Now, let us understand that the techniques for this carbon dioxide removal. Okay, so there are various other techniques that we follow for this CDR process. One of them being direct action technique or the DAC. What do we do in direct action technique? We completely target the carbon dioxide directly. We have machines that mimic trees. Machines mimicking trees. And these machines that are mimicking trees, they absorb the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So, this is direct action CCS removal. Then there is BECCS or the biomass energy carbon capture and storage. So, what are we targeting here? The biomass energy such as wood. So, combustion of this biomass energy also leads to carbon dioxide emission in the atmosphere. So, we are also targeting this biomass energy such as wood, and this BECCS helps in capturing this biomass energy and removing carbon dioxide from the source point, as I have explained to you before also. So, this is also a technique for carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere, so that you are stopping it at the very source of its emission. Okay, then there are other techniques as well, such as increase the weathering of rocks. Increase the weathering of rocks. So, what are we doing in weathering process? You understand that the rocks wither away with time, and natural withering is a time taking process. So, we are using chemicals on rocks that are important, and then what are we trying to do? We are increasing the weathering cycles of rocks, and if this in turn, what happens is, this in turn absorbs the carbon dioxide. You can spread that weathered rock, like chemically weathered rock into the agricultural produces, agricultural land, etc. So all of this you can do, and that in turn will absorb the carbon dioxide. So we are also trying to increase the weathering process of rocks by chemical means, so as to have an action on the carbon dioxide and so as to remove it. So these were some of the techniques that are used for carbon dioxide removal. Okay. Now let us discuss the scale and efficacy of this technique, that is CCS and CCU. That means at what scale do we need to practice CCS and CDR, and at what is the efficacy of this technique. Okay. So if I talk about the scale, that means at what scale do we need to practice these techniques, then according to the IPCC 6th assessment report, or the ARC6, to have more than a 50% chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius with no or limited overshoot, assume the world can sequester. Sequestering is also a technique of carbon dioxide removal. Okay, 5 billion tons of carbon dioxide by 2040. So definitely we need to practice this technique at a very large scale. Okay, and this is what is being suggested by IPCC also. That means you need to increase your affirmative action towards carbon dioxide removal. So without CDR, we have to decrease the carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere at a level that we achieved at the COVID pandemic. So during the COVID pandemic, the carbon dioxide emissions were reduced, but we need to increase that speed if we want to do it without using any technique like the CCS or the CDR, as suggested by the IPCC. So IPCC consider that that is not possible as of now. So IPCC says that yes, what you can do is you can ensure that you are using these techniques so as to cut down your net emissions. Okay, and this is more than India emits currently every year. So the emissions need to be stopped at a much larger speed if we want to achieve our net zero emission target. Okay, and there is no pathway to 1.5 degrees Celsius in ARC that doesn't use the carbon dioxide removal technique. So basically this report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was focused on using these techniques to cut down emissions and to achieve net negative emissions by 2050. Okay, so CDR ought to be used to counterbalance hard to abate residual emissions. So this is what I was explaining to you before also, that without this technique, without using this technique, it is almost impossible to achieve the net zero emission targets, because we have like unabated emissions of carbon dioxides due to the use of fossil fuels. Although the countries are talking about phasing down of these fossil fuels, but without affirmative actions, without active human involvement, intentional human involvement, it is not possible, because we have to sustain our lives also. So this is practically not possible, and that is why the IPCC is arguing that yes, we need to use the CDR at a very huge scale. Okay, now let us discuss the limitations of this technique. Okay, so what are the limitations of using CCS and CDR mechanism? So the first limitation is that the critics argue that it is expensive and that the technology is still in its infancy. That means the technology has not explored its full potential. It is still very new. In fact, the global north countries have this technology and they have an advantage of this technology. But the global south countries, the developing countries, if you talk about, are fairly new to using this technique. Okay. Then others are concerned about the safety of storing large quantities of CO2 underground and the potential for leaks. So the scientists have actually warned that you cannot, put the carbon dioxide below the Earth's surface. Why? Because it can leak. It can lead to various seismic disasters as well. So there is a potential threat for leaks as well. Okay. Then CDR projects can adversely affect land rights of indigenous communities and biodiversity and compete with other forms of land use like agriculture, that is crucial for ensuring food security. So the biggest disadvantage of this CDR and CCS technique, that it is heavily dependent on land. So as per the land use gap report of 2023, okay, so the countries are planning to use 1 million hectare of land for conducting this CDR activities. So if definitely if you'll use this much amount of land, it will definitely come in conflict with the people, indigenous people, the agriculture, especially in the global south countries. So they will definitely be more affected if you use land. But this CDR process is directly dependent on the land use. And the global north countries can also say that why should we transfer the technology? Why should we spend trillions of dollars in CDR mechanism? Okay, so this can also happen that the countries try to mitigate their natural reduction of carbon dioxide, mitigate their net emissions. They will say that, okay, let us emit and we'll do CDR and reduce the carbon dioxide. So the global north can also argue that why should we pay you for that? So that can also be a big concern in the use of these technologies. Okay, and this is all is being debated by the countries globally, and that is why they had this discussion at the COP28 also. So no matter that this technique is very efficient if utilized correctly. Okay, and the IPCC also says that you cannot say that you have achieved abated fossil fuel results if you cannot use this technique with 90 to 95% efficiency. 90 to 95% efficiency has to be achieved if you want to take full advantage of this technique. So the IPCC also argues that. Okay, so these were some of the important limitations on the use of this technique. Firstly, they are very expensive. The technology is comparatively very new for, especially for the global south countries. The global north countries have the technological benefit definitely. Then it is too much dependent on the land and hence can interfere with the land use pattern. So these were some of the limitations of using this technique. Okay, so with this we come to a conclusion of our today's discussion. We have seen that what is CCS or the carbon capture and storage technique. We have also seen what is carbon dioxide removal. We have also seen that what is the scale at which we need to practice this CDR if we want to target net zero emissions by 2050. We have also seen that what are the limitations of using this technique. Okay, now let us see a practice question for your prelims examination. So the question is, consider the following agricultural practices, and this is a PYQ of year 2012. Okay, your number 1 is contour bunding, your number 2 is relay cropping, and your number 3 is zero tillage. So you have to answer in the context of global climate change, which of the above helps in carbon sequestration and storage in the soil. So your options are, option A is 1 only, option B is 3 only, option C is 1, 2 and 3 and option D is none of them. Kindly drop your answers in the comment box below. Now let us analyze and see a practice question for your mains examination. So the question is, discuss the opportunities and challenges associated with CDR and CCS. So firstly you will explain these techniques, that what is CCS and what is CDR. Okay, then you will write that what are the opportunities associated with them. Yes, they are very effective. They definitely limit the emissions. They target the emissions not at their source only, but once the emissions have already occurred in the atmosphere as well. So definitely it is very important in mitigating the emissions and achieving net zero emission targets by 2050. Then you write the challenges or the limitations. Dependent on heavy land use, the technology is fairly new. The global north can say that why should we provide the funding for transferring this technology to the global south countries. You can conclude holistically that yes, the countries have to have some middle path and they need to agree that yes, the global north countries will provide a climate fund to the global south countries so as to help in establishment of effective CDR process. Okay, so you can conclude very holistically that yes, the countries can come together and support each other. I hope this session was insightful for you. If you have any feedback regarding this session, kindly drop it in the comment box below. If you liked today's video and found it to be helpful, kindly like the video and subscribe to our channel for more such updates. Thank you.